Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm Tom Shellcross. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, we haven't recorded in a week, and we just had a killer episode. This is great.
Ah, man. You know, I love these episodes, are topics that I'm genuinely curious about. So today, the short-term rentals, like that's something we just haven't dove into on the show enough.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, okay, short-term, mid-term, like all the questions I ask these people if I see someone who does it, and then to have someone today who actually knows the answer, right? I go to meetups and people are like, oh, well, I'm thinking about doing it. It's like, all right, well, that's no help to me.
No, I'll ask people those questions we asked today, and they'll be like, I didn't realize that. I'm like, oh, that's not good if you already bought the property.
So yeah, no, ton of information. Also a good dude. Also, I guess I'll give the fair warning to everyone, like we probably a few more swear words than usual. So if you're listening with your kids or anything, just that's your fair warning, so you can't give us a bad review.
Oh yeah, he's a military man, so he likes to muck it up. I love it. He's awesome. He brings so much energy. So
yeah, so much energy, and also just very straightforward with it's not all pies, pie in the sky. It's not all roses. Just talking about how it's being compressed, the actual challenges. So doesn't mean don't do it, as we always say, but it's always it's good to hear both sides of the coin.
Yeah, no, I mean, like anything coming out of the gate, it might seem more attractive. And I think we're all hearing what the upside, but we're not understanding the details. And that's what a lot we dive into today. So that's why I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, let's keep going here. What's the housing provider tip of the week?
All right. Right now it is 102 degrees, about 112 feeling outside here in August. And one thing that's important as a housing provider is to make sure you have a relationship with an HVAC or just HVAC company for either these extreme heat days where you need to get the AC fixed, or these extreme cold dips where you need to get the furnace. And I say that because you don't want to wait till it's 112 degrees. Then you have to call somebody, a commercial vendor that you don't have a relationship with. They're going to jam you. But if you got a guy that maybe you have preset rates, or maybe he's going to be priority for you, make sure you have that relationship. Even if you only have one building, it's important to have that guy. It might be a guy that lives on your block or whatnot. So just have that relationship lined up. And if you need somebody for that, maybe we got to get someone on Build Your Team at straightupchicagoinvestor.com for HVAC out there, because maybe a couple guys, because it's a real geographic type space. But make sure you have somebody lined up. So at days like this, when your AC goes out or your tenant's AC goes out, you don't get jammed.
That's a great advice, because I feel like I get a lot of calls those days, right? Those really cold days, like, hey, Tom, my boiler went out HV, can I borrow your guy? And it's like, dude, like, he's got all my stuff. He's got 400 calls. I can't help you. Like, he'll get to you in 2 days. Yeah. Like, you can't just go lean on another investor. Like, you need to have that relationship. So, yeah. Don't get jammed. New slogan.
Don't get jammed. Yep.
All right. Today's guest. Let's do this.
All right, man. Today's guest is Navy and University of Chicago grad. He's managed multifamily properties, Airbnbs, Chicago, Minneapolis for the last 5 years. He brings a lot of energy. And without further ado, I want to introduce JD Modrak. All right, JD, welcome. It's exciting. I'm excited. We finally got the show to get recorded. I think we were talking before, and we've been going at this since right around the new year.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. Thanks for having me, guys. It's funny, like my partner, Joey, who's still around on a couple businesses and owned a bunch of buildings with, like American Airlines pilot, between him and I were not easy to pin down, as is evidenced by him being flying right now. So thanks for the time, though, guys.
Yeah, and ultimately you sent the email yesterday, and I'm like, oh no! Like as soon as I saw your name, I'm like, no, he can't be canceling. So we're originally going to have him on here with you. We're like, no, we're just going to record this, get this going. So you're solo today, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a topic that we, both Tom and I, are very interested in. I know a lot of our audiences, because they always request this topic, and we promise we'll do more. So you have a open ear of people that want to learn for this topic. But short-term rentals. Talk to me about kind of the beginning of how you got into this, or maybe how you got into real estate and how you shifted to short-term. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, it's funny. I've shifted around a lot, actually, to be honest with you. Short-term was just totally happenstance. I'd been an Airbnb user from maybe 2012 to 2014. Loved it. Had a tertiary interest in real estate. When I lived in California, a friend of mine owned a multifamily complex. It was kind of a dump when he bought it, and we were slowly fixing it up. I helped him property manage it while he was on deployment, and I was trying to convince him for a while to launch some Airbnbs, and just didn't really make sense for the other tenants in the building. But I got to Chicago and came across a potential landlord, literally waiting for dinner one night, my wife, and she starts chatting with this random guy, and we all started talking, and we ended up never leaving the place where we were supposed to we were leaving the place where we were getting beers to go have dinner because we just chatted with this guy all night. And he turned into our landlord. And he's like, when we moved in, he's like, yeah, I manage this Airbnb in the basement. It's just like this dingy basement that's like too crappy to put an actual rental in, but it makes me like 15 grand a year as an Airbnb. And at the time in Logan Square, Chicago, if you look for an Airbnb, there's like 8 of them. And if there's not anything else to book and this thing's $75 a night, why not? And he was like, I'll shut it down when you guys move in so you don't have to deal with it. And we're like, hold on. Like, I'm in business school at the time, making no money. And I'm like, we'll manage it for you. And after like 6 months, I'm like, can we do all of it for you? Because like the way you're running things is like driving me insane. We were just kind of managing emergency response and cleaning and kind of checking on things. And like, honestly, when I first started an Airbnb, if you didn't clean the unit before a guest arrived, you could just be like, hey guys, the unit's not clean. Sorry, I'll drop off some clean sheets. And people are like, oh, no problem. We spent $60 a night. No big deal, you know? And now it's like they find a single hair underneath the bed in the 4th bedroom nobody ever uses, and you have to give a full cleaning fee refund. So things have changed a lot. You know, 2 years later, we're running that place for 35 grand a year, and market rent on it was $900 a month. And I knew that like there's something here when you could generate 3.5x revenue on LTR rates. So that was kind of the start. And I graduated from business school, used a VA loan to buy a multifamily, you know, put down $12,000, bought $1 million 4-flat in Wicker Park, turned 2 units into Airbnbs and just cash flowed the hell out of them for a couple of years. And I liked that so much that I started working for some larger kind of startups. I think when we finished, we had about 30 Airbnbs in Chicago. From 2016 until about 2020, I think we shut things down. Luckily, just before COVID, maybe 2019. And been doing it ever since at more of a national kind of scaled level for a couple companies under concept.
Jay, that's awesome. So there's a lot. Let's unpack some of that right there.
Yeah, sure.
So I want to circle back to the VA loan. Before doing that, let's talk a little about, you mentioned, hey, it's 3.5x, you know, what we were making, you know. Can you just give a back of the napkin, because people say this all the time, and then like if you're at a meetup, then everyone says like, yeah, but you got to pay the utilities and you got to pay the internet and you got the cleaning fees. Can you just give a rough idea of like, what does that net actually look like, right? If my Airbnb is getting me $3,000 a month and market rent is $1,000, how much better is it actually, right? It's not $2,000 better, but it is better, but like it's not apples to apples. And maybe take a step back and explain some of those expenses that aren't accounted for. Like people at meetups get bonkers about it, but they don't account for those expenses.
Yeah. Like, you know, be perfectly honest, I'm not super bullish on Airbnbs anymore. And part of that is because companies like mine, like you're going to have to compete with me and I'm going to keep driving down costs. But another part of that is that ratio has moved down. Competition has increased. Supply in Chicago has moved at like a 15 or 20% annualized rate since I started, right? And when I started, there was maybe 1,000 listings. Today, there's 16 to 18,000 listings active in Chicago on a full-time basis. That is material changes in competition. That same unit in Logan Square probably makes 20 grand a day. We added up to 35,000 at one point. That is erosion. So yeah, back to the...
While long-term rents are probably increasing too, right? So they're closing the gap from the other side.
Yeah, that is huge. And that is what my company, Sonder, everybody else is struggling with. When you have this dual compression of competition on the top end, and then your alternative, your best alternative, LTR rates are up 16 to 20% in these markets over the past 2 to 3 years, you are now talking about a meaningfully profit squeezed equation. And so, yeah, like before you start the back of the envelope exercise, what you really need to do is you need to think about things from a contribution margin perspective. And what I mean when I say that is the first 12 to 36 months, depending on how well or poorly you launch an Airbnb, that you run an Airbnb, you are paying back your startup costs. And this is a huge thing investors miss. And like, I love when people come to me and say, oh, I've made $50,000 in the last year and a half on Airbnb. I'm like, what'd you spend furnishing and how long did it take you? Because they've actually made that minus what they could have just made in rent, minus what they spent on furniture, minus the time they've taken to run it in that meantime while they were just paying the furniture back. So if we take it to a really back of the envelope, let's say you are making today, that at 3.5 is closer to 2.5, right? It's growing again as rents stabilize and the short-term market recovers. But if you make 2.5 times your RevPAR, which is what you make every night in short-term revenue, against rent par, which is what you would make every night long-term revenue, if that ratio is 2.5x, and you have about a 60% margin, which is pretty average. It's actually decent to good. If you're paying attention, you can do a 60% or better margin if you have really high revenue. You now are left, like with 0.5 coverage, right, at a 60% margin. So you have 1.5 space left. Let's say you're a $2,000 a month.
Take a step back here. Slow down. What does that mean for our listeners?
Yeah, exactly. So let's say you were going to make let's say it's a $2,000 rental and you're making like, let's call it $5,000, right? 2.5 times in short-term rental average revenue, which is not too
so you're saying monthly, my long-term's $2,000, but if I Airbnb it, I'm grossing $5,000.
Yep. Your costs, depending on how you do them, some people won't absorb these because they're going to spend a ton of their own time cleaning their own units, etc. But you should value that time. Your costs are going to average about 60%, or your margin is going to be about 60%. So your costs are 40%. So that that knocks you down to just 0.5x coverage, about $3,000, right? And that's still not bad, right? You're making a material nut over your LTR. But if you spent $12,000 to $15,000 to furnish that unit, that means that extra $12,000 you make in the first year, and all the time you spent running it, and all the time you spent furnishing it, you are still behind the 8 ball. Versus if you would just run a long-term rental unit and spend all that time going and buying another long-term rental unit. And this is what, after 2 to 3 years, you start to see a huge cliff where a lot of investors exit after 2 or 3 years. And what they don't even think about or realize is this sunk cost fallacy that you really start making money in the second or third year in a short-term rental. So if you're going to do these things, you need to be committed to the communications, the incessant guest inquiries for the next 4 to 6 years for you to truly make an outsized return. It has to be viewed as a long-term. And at some point, you might have to be comfortable that you're going to hand this thing off to a manager. After you pay a manager, you're going to be down to like 1.2, right? That is kind of the industry goal, is a 1.2, maybe 1.3x with some scale return against long-term rents after all of your marginal costs, if that makes sense.
Can you give us a 30,000 foot overview of what's this is a new kind of space, and it's changed a lot though in the time in the last decade. So from 2012 to now, 11 years later, what's different? You already mentioned, the product doesn't have to be bad. Now, I don't think the commitment to the reviews was as bad early on. Like, can you guys give us an idea of like that and now?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, to put it really stupidly, like our first Airbnb, before we arrived, our host was offering marijuana to all guests, right? I can't imagine you survive on the platform very long anymore doing that. The bed was often not made when you showed up. It was a place to crash. The cleaning standards were minimal. That cleaning fee we paid was about $20 to $25. Today, when I look at another short-term, this actually happened recently, another short-term rental operator that we were looking at quoted $25 average cleaning fees, and that's either fraud or they are literally just walking into the unit, changing the sheets and walking out, because $25 buys you nothing anymore. So labor rates have gone up materially, as well as guest expectations. So I'd say cleaning fees is one of the biggest things that's changed in the space. Your marginal cleaning cost per hour has gone up 40, 50% in the last 10 years, maybe more. And then your length of cleaning time has gone up probably double, if not triple. So your average cleaning fees on a 2-bedroom, maybe were $40 to $80, depending, 5-6 years ago, are now running $70 to $110. And that's pretty material, because a lot of hosts aren't smart enough to manage what I would call length of stay. And so every time you turn a unit over, if you're spending $150 between your supplies, your scheduling time, and your cleaning time, you're actually not making a lot of money if you're only charging $150 a night. That first night's just paying for your cleaning and your cost. So you have to be really smart on that. And that's probably one of the bigger things. Guest expectations is starting to look more like a hotel. So not just around cleaning, but also around service expectations. So the average number of hours you need to spend communicating with guests, and the average number of hours you need to spend responding to guests when they have a problem, and how fast you respond, has definitely got more intensive. And like all those things are compressing margins, regressing this industry to the mean that it always was going to end up at, if that makes sense.
Let's talk a little bit about that time commitment, right? So just walk us through maybe, the 5 or 6 things you need to be aware of. Someone's thinking about doing the Airbnb, right? There's the actual, hey, I have an issue. right? I know a lot of people have like a playbook, like to hopefully triage some of this. But what are some of those things that maybe the person who's doing their first Airbnb is not thinking of or hasn't thought through yet?
Yeah, first things first, probably going to sound repetitive, but you have to find or train an insanely high quality cleaner. If you're not going to start with scale, I recommend finding individuals so you cut out the margin of a cleaning company, and you have to train them to over clean. That you have to train them to a certain level of attention to detail. You have to have them inspect their own work. And you have to make sure that first and foremost, your guests will always walk into a clean unit. The next stage of that is you have to keep a pretty tight guest communication and turnover loop. And what I mean by that is like, you have to be really robust about the days of week that you communicate. And there are some platforms that can like automate some of this. So you probably want to set up a tool where you draft automated messaging per unit to make sure that the guests get their check-in and check-out directions. If you're really next level as you start to scale, you can set up some automated responses for common questions. And then you also want to get a tool that connects to that, what it would be effectively a PMS, like Buildium or Yardi. There's short-term rental equivalents like Guesties, one of the predominant ones. You want to connect a cleaning tool into that as well, so that you take some of the headache out of dispatching your cleaners. There's two parts to the cleaning operation. It's the cleaning, the training and scheduling, but then also importantly, the payment. You have to make sure you pay your cleaners really fast, especially if you're going to go with individuals. And then the last piece I would say is some sort of emergency response. Like, I'm not a huge fan of remotely managing rentals. Ironically, I work for a full-time company where we think we've got this down, but and I think we do a great job. For a one-off investor, it's really challenging, and you own that asset. Like, if things are going wrong, no one is going to manage that back to good faster than you will. So you have to have a really high trust level, responsible human who also ideally can fix things and has contractor resources in the area to fix things they can. And that's kind of the basic building blocks.
One other question then, hold on, before you go on, let's talk about even getting the guest in there, right? How much time do you spend up front on just the pricing and the algorithms and making sure that you're actually getting booked and optimizing your price instead of just, hey, I'm 100%, but I'm not making any money?
Absolutely, yeah. So every relationship I've ever taken, like every deal I've ever taken over from a struggling operator has had one thing, usually two things, guaranteed true. Cleanliness was probably a problem, not always, but one of the guaranteed problems was pricing. Even investors I now respect, who actually have more sizable STR operations than I ever had, who I managed units for, were pricing incredibly poorly. They often price for occupancy. So you see a lot of amateurs quote, I'm full this month. And if you tell me that, especially if you tell me I'm full in July, in January, unless you're in a really seasonal vacation rental market where people book 6 months out, you are fucked. Let me just tell you right now, you screwed up. And all of the deal hawks have savaged your occupancy. So I've taken over units before that were fully booked for the year with 35, 40 grand on the books. The next year, in January, February, the next year in February, we were probably 20% booked, if that. And that's even all changed now. And by the end of the year, we booked 70 grand on that. So there are price tools. I try not to recommend specifics, but there are pricing tools you can use to do this. There is a bit of a learning curve to use a pricing tool. At the end of the day, I recommend just reading a lot about what I would call revenue management fundamentals. I had like kind of the luck of when I started in the STR space, I also joined United Airlines in the revenue management department at the same time. So I was like pretty attuned to like what we call compression events, meaning really heavy guest traffic weekends. So knowing what your conference convention schedules are, knowing what your big events are, like Taylor Swift. I wrote a 1-page ode to Taylor Swift in my business write-up last month because every single market she's been to in my markets in this country has just like destroyed records in the last 5 years. And you have to know T Swift is coming. And if you don't, you are going to get booked and somebody's going to snipe you at the 200 a night setting you had, and you should have charged 700. So you have to stay really attuned to that stuff. And honestly, that kind of behavior doesn't scale very well if you're managing a 1-bedroom in Wicker Park.
You know what I love, Tom? Every niche has its own lingo. Like you use the word snipe, use what else? You said something else there about getting a good deal, some hogs or something like that. But it's great how
Deal hawks.
Deal hawks. It's great how you guys probably have this whole lingo around short term that we're just learning here today.
Yeah. The pricing is definitely one of the most important things you can do. I think when you first start, the other thing I would say is you really have to be ruthlessly focused on the first 5 to 10 reviews coming in quickly, meaning if somebody books, you shouldn't even allow people to book for more than 3 nights the first month you launch a unit, because nothing is more important in your first month than getting reviews. And so you should be doing everything you can do to have perfect check-ins and then solicit reviews upon checkout, even incentivizing that. And you don't want somebody to show up as your first guest and stay for 60 nights, because that means you're not hitting the algorithm for the next 3 months, and your bookings, you now pushed your ramp, we call it. The first 90 days you operate a property is ramp, when you're going from $0 in revenue up to your stabilized revenue. You've pushed that ramp out another 2 months if somebody stays too long. So the first month is really important, because you really don't generate outsized, what I would call traction, meaning views on your listing, until you have those set number of reviews.
What we use the word incentivize there. What are some incentives you might offer a guest to your review?
It's absolutely not like cash, right? So one of the things I recommend doing is when you book your first 5 to 10 guests in the first 30 days, you do so at a deliberately lower price below market. And so when they book, you inform them like, hey, I'm a new listing. I'm super excited for feedback. And I'm really excited to tell you that I kept my price artificially low because I'm really excited to get some reviews. And I really hope that you find this was a great experience and a great value. Things like that are how I like to incentivize reviews. Make people, they already know they got a good deal. They probably clicked on you because you were a good deal. But when they stay and they have a great time, now they have that in the back of their head that you're a new listing, they want to help you out. If they feel like they got a great value, then when you ping them a week later to leave that review, if they haven't already, they're going to do it. Like they're going to go out of their way to do that. There's like one of the few positive things I could say about Airbnb is there's an interesting relationship between guests and hosts, and guests have a willingness to help new hosts out if they feel like they got a great value.
But you got to deliver though. You got to deliver on the product though. Like I picture myself sitting outside the house with a phone, just getting ready to text back or run over and fix something just in case for those first 5 bookings.
Absolutely. I mean,
those are some great nuggets, man. I would not have gotten that. I would have had the first person take 60 days. I'm like, great.
Yeah, you won. You're winning.
I'm ready. This is awesome. This is easy. So that's a lot of good stuff to unpack there.
Still today, I screwed
Jenny, one thing you mentioned was the perfect check-in.
Yeah, the perfect check-in.
What is that? Give us the step by step. Like, I got my first person. They're coming to Chicago for 3 days. I'm all excited. I'm gonna meet them in a tuxedo, champagne in hands. Like, what is the real perfect check-in look like?
Right. It depends on your customer and what you're trying to offer, right? So if I'm offering a garden unit in Logan Square, it's a really clean, well-stocked unit with all these snacks and an incredibly clean bathroom, right? If I'm at the Ritz-Carlton, it's going to be a very different experience. One of the first things I recommend doing to guarantee a perfect check-in for your first guest is to actually either yourself or others stay in your unit before you do. It's really important to experience that unit the way a guest would. Literally sleep there, eat there, shower there, ship there. Like, you want to make sure that you have tested all your systems, quote unquote. And like at my company today, we're still trying to figure out how to do this perfectly, but we have a pretty robust first day checklist we've rolled out in some places and where it's worth it. And there's just all these little things. Like, a lot of investors have never actually showered in their place before. And somebody emails and they're like, hey, I don't know how to like turn the tub on. And you're like, shit, neither do I. And so you want to have kind of a robust, what I would call operations guide in the background, especially if eventually you pass this off to VAs, Mark. You want to have a robust set of things you know about every property, especially the quirks, ready to go, so that when a guest asks a question, you already have an answer.
We forgot to tell you no swearing on the show. No, I'm joking. I'm totally joking. I told you, you keep swearing.
I would have told you I'm not coming on.
So, when someone's looking to get into the short-term side of things, like, how do they know demand? So for me, like, the obvious, like, all right, pull up a town for the next 2 months, and if there's no occupancy or if there's nowhere to rent, there might be a demand there. Is that too common sense, or am I missing something? Like, how do people determine if they should be investing in this in a specific area?
Yeah, I am a believer in trust your gut. So like my favorite area that I want to make in a vacation, like I only have one vacation rental investment right now, and it's as an LP, to be honest. And there's one area that I dream about because I did my bachelor party there and there was like no inventory and the experience there was great. Me and the owner have done back and forth a few times over the years about me buying the property, and I might eventually just say screw it and build my own mimic lodge like she had. You can trust your gut, especially if you're there in the high season and you start looking around and you act like a guest and you're like, my God, the Motor Lodge is charging $199 a night, which is what happened to me. The next time I went to that area, I paid $220 a night to stay in a double wide trailer. And I'm like, maybe I need to invest in double wide trailers, right? Like, but you do need to do it best beyond that, right? Because if the season is only a month long, then your carry costs do not make sense probably for $220 a night for a month or two, right? In non-seasonal markets, you can probably be a little safer. There is a website called AirDNA. They're fairly ubiquitous. I try not to exactly follow what they do. One of my big qualms with AirDNA is probably after the wave has already hit the beach, they still continue to recommend markets like Nashville. And I think Nashville, for instance, is a massive bubble right now. I personally own in Nashville, but like, I can't wait for my partner to sell the property. And I ping them about it monthly. Joey, who should have been on the podcast, asked him last week. Anyone who wants 1031, 700 grand, make 90 grand a year, no problem. But it, when things are best in short-term rentals, in my opinion, it might not be a bad time to sell. So I caution people against using AirDNA's rating system because sometimes that rating is reflecting on an already outsized performance against the mean, and there's a million other people looking at that same data. The problem with democratized data is the access means that a lot of people are going to be flowing their money there. I really recommend finding either like high class A assets, just like real estate, LTR real estate, where the demand will never wane, or going after niche markets where maybe it's an okay rating and the rent part, meaning what you would make per month in rent, is really low. So it would be really hard not to create a margin against that on a short-term rental basis.
When you're looking at these, JD, are you also doing like, hey, my worst case scenario, I can break even or tread water if I got to do this long term? Like, how important is that safety net to you? Or in some of these areas, it's just like, you know what? It is what it is.
I've never invested without it yet. Now, the Boy Scout Lodge in Minneapolis or in Minnesota would definitely be a $700,000 overpay at her last price if I have to long-term rent that unit. So if you are not going to have a backup plan, i.e. long-term rents, need to cover your mortgage, which is what we've always had. A couple things need to be true. It needs to be a heavily tourism-focused market where there is major disincentives for local government to get rid of short-term rentals. I prefer really restrictive markets where the short-term rental law is sort of settled science. There's three types of markets. There's like markets where there's no rules, which are maybe the worst. Some investors think they're the best or used to, but those rules change and you're screwed. There's some markets where the rules are there, but they're not being enforced or they've changed a lot over the last few years. And then there are other markets, let's say Jacksonville, Florida, where the municipality has rules, the state says they can't change them, and I would consider those relatively stable. And that is the environment that I probably want to invest in. The best market, which is a niche of that, is really, really, really restrictive rules that create supply limitations and inherently give you a moat around your short-term rent. Those are probably my favorite, but if you buy the asset, you damn well better know if that short-term rental license will transfer between investors. Seen it happen before. Go to apply for your new license, give them the old license number, and they say, sorry, you're back on the waiting list. And they have a worthless LTR asset that basically turns into workforce housing for bartenders in the area. So yeah, the backup plan, I just generally haven't invested without it. And frankly, it's done me well because you know what? I converted every single one of my short-term rentals to either, frankly, all the medium-term rentals at this point, meaning like traveling nurses is kind of the common reference. It's not even half of what we probably rent to, except for in a couple buildings. But we just charge a premium on this beat up furniture, maybe 15%. We do extra work. Actually, it's probably 20 or 30%, and we net 10 or 15% premium on medium-term rents. But we do some extra work, and we charge a higher management fee for anything we do that work for, too.
Well, it's a good segue to midterm rentals. give us kind of for your company, do you guys do midterm rentals more so the short? Like, give us kind of your thoughts on midterm versus short term.
So if you're going to do short-term rentals in a seasonal market, you better understand midterm rentals. I've always said to people in Chicago, and I guess I'll say it to the Straight Up podcast in Chicago, the money in Chicago is not made in the summer. Anybody can make money in Chicago on a short-term rental in the summer. You could, if you're not making 3 to 5 times rent in the summer, you're in trouble if you have that over occupancy problem. But in the winter, when you are 20% occupied because you don't know what you're doing, or you're 20% occupied because you're not willing to give your unit away for less than $100 a night, which is logical for risk reasons, you better have a plan. And that plan needs to start at the end of the summer to fill that unit in the winter. And it's funny, we really optimize this. I think we average about 80% occupancy in the winter in our units against the market averaging 40, maybe 45 at the time. And the way we did this was through 2 means: length of stay discounting on Airbnb, incentivizing people who stay really long times to pay heavily discounted rates. Means I don't have any turnover costs. I basically don't pay attention to you for 2, 3, 4 months. And then we also posted, believe it or not, back in the day, a lot of Craigslist, apartments.com, and standard LTR sites, but we posted less than 6-month leases. And then if somebody wants to stay longer, cool. My rent rate is $2,000, $2,000, $4,000, $6,000, $7,000 if you want to stay through August. And as long as that's in the lease, it's okay. You do have to know what you're doing with leasing. Now, the latter category of just straight up medium-term rentals as a business plan is not generically proven out yet, I would say. Most of the startups that are doing medium-term rentals as a business plan have failed already. And many of them are money-losing operations still. The niches that I've seen be successful with medium-term rentals are the ones that are either using it as a temporary alternative to STR or have found a demand center that is currently being unmet, meaning proximity to a hospital, proximity to a large, quick-growing urban area with a lot of jobs available, i.e. relocations. And there's a few other niches out there like workforce housing where people just take Class C units, they make them Class B- units in Miami, and you got this influx of people coming in. And you also have like some workforce housing opportunities for people who travel, like, for instance, Key West. I've seen them do it really well. But in the winter, or in the off season, rather, it's not the winter there. That's probably their on season. They're pretty empty. So you have to be making your nut in the on season. So in Chicago, we're probably charging 50 to 70% premium in the summer on them. And then in the winter, I'm willing to go all the way down to 80% of long-term rents. Maybe we've even gone lower. I don't know, for the right lease, the right time frame to just kind of get us through survival. So it's very similar to STR, especially in seasonal markets. It's just a much more moderated pricing scheme. And obviously there's no reviews being left. So like, maybe if you're listing them on Airbnb, there are, but like the stakes are lower. The cleaning standards, the response times, the SLAs, they all look a lot closer to like being lit, which is nice. Saves you that.
Got it. So, with Chicago, and I'm actually running into this right now. We finished a rehab, and we're gonna finish in September, right? I've missed leasing season, and it's a giant unit. Let's say the 3-bed, 3-bath. Like those people are they plan, right? They plan in January because they have a lease coming in April, and they go do their shopping. They're not waiting till the last second. Does it make sense in those situations to suck it up, pay the furnishing, and have someone float you through winter? Or is it better just to, hey, let's just drop price, get them on an 18-month lease, 6-month lease, whatever. And, I know it's very situational, but give us your thoughts on that of just using it as a stopgap when you miss the season for whatever reason. You bought the property late, you finished the rehab, whatever. You miss spring. You miss summer.
I think if you're partnered up with Mark on the real estate side, your guys' skill, it might make sense, right? If you have an adaptive reuse or a future use case for that furniture, or if you can create a relationship with a furnishing company that can get that furniture in at an affordable rate and just get you onto the right season, I know how valuable that is. There's 2 things you have to consider. The furniture costs. An average non-scaled investor it's not going to make sense to just fill that unit with even $5,000 worth of furniture just to cover a few months generally. The other thing you have to think about is lenders. So if you're repositioning that asset, sub 6-month leases do not play as well for capital partners. So like if your lender sees that lease is sub 6 months, they will do one of two things. They will either reduce the rent amount that you're paying because they know there's a premium there, they're getting smart, or they will increase your cap rate and hurt you on the recapitalization cash out if that's the move you're playing. We are stabilizing at a 50-unit asset in the Southeast market, we'll say right now, I won't say where. 50 units, half the units are long-term, a third of the units are medium-term, a third of the units are short-term. And we are having to do this really weird balancing act between long-term rents. We're in the off-season, so we're trying to like push a lot of medium terms into the long-term to get the long-terms on the right term. And we actually had to back off of some of our short and medium-term stuff to keep the lender happy. They gave us a percentage of number of units of long-term rents they wanted, and we're just taking 10%, 15% hits. And these are micro units. They should clear even in the off-season, but like it will materially impact their refinance. And so they've extended their loan to just get a better season so we can season some better rents.
So that's a great tip. And let's go down the financing route now. Even just, let's say I buy a property. I'm doing short-term, I'm doing mid-term, I'm doing, non-traditional, I'll call it, not long-term. I've been running it for 2 years. At what point are lenders going to say, yep, we're going to count this rent and you have your stuff together and we're going to treat this just like long-term rentals? Or do they do that? Like, talk about the lending side of it, because I think that's something most people don't even think about.
Yeah. I mean, so cap rates of hotels are 2 to 4 points higher, I want to say, depending on what market you're in, than just because of the inherent risk that an operation like a hotel operation adds. You have to think about short-term rentals sitting somewhere between long-term rents and a hotel, right? So there are lenders, increasingly so, that will underwrite your assets. They will even count all of your rents, but they're just going to apply a different cap rate to that asset than if it were an LTR. And most of the time, that cap rate compression that you would have got if you just went LTR washes out a decent portion, not all always, a decent portion of the STR revenue. You also have to be relatively sophisticated in providing forward 12-month outlooks to these lenders and trailing 12-month performance, because you're going to need to, they know there are marginal costs. They're getting smarter. You're going to need a P&L that clearly states those marginal costs. And if you just show them revenue like you really need to for LTR and they apply a standard margin against it because they don't care about your costs, they are going to call foul. So the first step, obviously, finding a lender who will do it, which is not impossible anymore. But you really have to convince a lender, ideally showing trailing 12s, trailing 24s, that there is an outsized return. And you can't do that if you only tell them half the story on the top line. So I think it's really important to keep records and show your lenders that even with labor costs, even with cleaning costs, even with materials costs, even with furniture costs, you are making a return that is higher and has been higher for a while than your LTR. If you do not have a trailing 12-month, like the previous operator didn't have one, or it's never been a short-term rental before, usually you are going to pay a 1 to 2 point premium on the top end of LTR financing rates. So most of my friends, when rates were at 5.5, are paying 7.5 to 8 on financing. And your LTV might be a little bit lower too. So you might have to put 30% down. There's the alternative. If you're a new investor, you just don't necessarily tell the lender what your plan with the property is. And in theory, they shouldn't care. I'm not advocating like claiming it owner occupied and committing mortgage fraud or anything, but getting a vacation home, for instance, we have a 10% down vacation home loan with a lender in Nashville, and 10% down. I don't even want to tell you guys the rate anymore, but it's an outstanding rate. And our mortgage payment is like still under half, well under half what our monthly take is right now. And that thing's cash flowing like a banshee, but you only get so many of those second home loans, right? That you have to carry and personally guarantee. I'm guessing you guys at your scale are looking at all commercial at this point, and that does get tricky.
Let's also talk about insurance. Do you have to disclose anything to your insurance agent? Is that a higher premium? I know it's a small piece of the pie, but let's get everything on the table here.
Yeah, man, it's not that small anymore. So there is a decrease,
but yes.
Yeah, there is a decreasing number of insurers for short-term rentals now. But they are out there. I recommend replacing your entire HOI policy with one that allows and knows you're doing an STR on the property. Because if there's an STR claim, which most of the claims will be if it's a full-time STR, they may not pay it even if it would have qualified if the homeowner if they think you were living there and someone else did it and they weren't supposed to be on that property and they find out, they may not pay that claim I also generally recommend like $1 million in umbrella. Even though Airbnb and other platforms claim they provide insurance, I recommend spending the $1,000 a year if it's a good enough asset, 3-bedroom plus or really good revenue, let's say 50, 60K a year plus. I recommend pulling an umbrella policy on top of it as well. But I do not recommend just putting typical HOI and not telling your insurance company.
How do
I'd agree with the umbrella regardless of what you're doing, right? Like long-term, short-term, mid-term doesn't matter. Like, protect yourself there.
But
so
a lot of
I know I'm jumping around, but let's go back.
Yeah, so it's really important though.
Yeah. All right, so I want to jump back to financing real quick. So let's say I own a 3-unit that I'm owner occupied. Now I live in one of the units and I'm, I can rent out the other 2. In that sort of refinance example, it's not based on my NOI. It's based on comps because I'm at 2 to 4 unit. Is there anything I need to do with the lender there? Or is it just, hey, this is what it is? Like the residential financing, like how do they look at this? Because we went down the commercial path and that all makes sense. Do you have any input there? And I bring that up because we have a lot of people in that scenario. They bought a 3-unit, they're living in it, and they had nice residential financing.
We've usually used our medium-term leases we sign in the winter. I don't have a ton of experience with the sub-commercial on multi, except for my own ones I've done in Chicago. So that first 4 flat we ever bought, granted it was a VA cash out, which by the way are the most glorious things in the world, right back up to 100%. I think we went like tonight, but they did not even request our short-term rental revenues. To validate, however, that rents were up materially from purchase price, we provided 4 to 6 month leases to show that the unit was making more or capable of making more revenue than when we bought it. They still generally ignored it. They still went off of comps. The appraisal generally tied to the local comps we had in the area. And luckily, the asset values were up 5-6%. And he gave us the high end of the comps because he saw that our long-term rents were up about 15-20% when we did it. To be honest with you, the major way we gained value through a cash out is we had a second position note on that mortgage. It was supposed to be a VA, didn't end up being a VA. We used like a home possible loan that are only available in like opportunity zones. We had to take a second position note for like 13% of the deal. We paid off that note in like 18 months. So we force created all that equity because it was like a 4%, went to 5.5%, went to 6.5% second position. And so we wanted to pay it when it was at 4.5%, which was a high rate at the time. And then what we did is we transitioned into a VA cash out, which used local comps. And then also they saw that we paid off an $130,000 note in 2 years. And they're like, you bought a building that was doing $70,000 a year. How did you pay off our mortgage this whole time and a second $130,000 note? And we're like, hey, here's how we did it. They cared, but they didn't care. Like they didn't ultimately use that in the assessor's underwriting. The more STR focused lenders will look at trailing 24 though, if you have. But the problem with those lenders is they're really niche and they're going to charge you pretty material premium on your rate that the more traditional lenders may not.
Gotcha. What about taxes? Is this short-term income? Is this long-term income? How does that affect your real estate investors filing at the end of the year?
Yeah, I think it depends. I'm actually pretty dated the last time I did this research. It does depend on whether or not you want to qualify yourself as an active or passive real estate investor, right? I remember that I was gray based on my reading of the rules, and I qualify. I don't even remember which way I qualified it. Whatever way saved me taxes is how I qualified it via a conversation with my accountant. But I told them how much time I was putting into it. We made it clear. The funny part, I actually had to revert that, and I think I ended up paying higher taxes on it later because I had self-directed IRA investing into the asset, and I realized that if I was actively sweating into that IRA, that was a problem with the IRS as well. So we changed that around when we invested with self-directed IRA, which could probably still get me in trouble. I probably shouldn't say that publicly, but it was more than 5 years ago. It's a really great territory, though, because the IRS has no references to short-term rental anywhere in the tax code. Last time I was familiar with it.
What about what you do now? You left the mom and pop industry and you went and you work for a big, I think you said venture-backed company. What's that doing to the industry, and what type of percentage are they compared to mom and pop in the space, in the short-term space?
Still so small. Yeah, I'd say if you added up the 5 largest companies in the space, it's less than 10% of all available. It's probably less than 5% of all available short-term rentals being managed in the country. So there's massive fragmentation still. We are absolutely driving down rate. We are smarter about how we balance the 3-legged stool of revenue, which is what you charge per night, how many nights a month you're filled, and how long each stay is. That last leg is where the amateur really kills themselves. Like I said earlier, it's like if you're doing 500 a night, but you have 2-night stays and you're paying a really high turnover cost, your margin per night is a lot lower than if I'm doing 300 a night and my stays are all 15 days long. So we are definitely driving down rate, just like any supply increase would. We are also sucking up a lot of cleaning resources. So a lot of smaller cleaning companies now can go get contracts with a company like mine. They're probably not going to go find 20 Tom, Dick, and Harry's to clean one-off units with at a good price if they can just go clean my 20 units in one building. And we probably pay slightly less per turn, materially less per turn, but we give them a heck of a lot more volume. And we also typically turn over more often than they do. We also, you guys, when you first started in this space, if you first started in this space 6 years ago, you're definitely making 60 to $80 an hour for your time. I'm paying somebody $25 an hour to do everything you still have to do as a homeowner, which means I can afford to charge less and still make the same margins you, if you're thinking about it that way. Anyway. So by lowering costs, eventually we're going to make it more affordable for the people staying, but we're going to make it less profitable for the people we're competing with. But I don't think I don't think we're having an outsized impact yet. I don't think there's enough consolidation or scale for this truly to be moving the needle.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like much like the Blackstones of the world, they only have they're getting all the attention and actually driving housing advocacy right now, but they own such a small percentage of it. All right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Man, JD, we appreciate you coming out here. You ready for the wrap up?
Sure. Absolutely.
What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
Oh, man. Do it. I talk to veterans a lot about using their VA loans. It's actually one of my next passions in life. And talk to experts and eventually hire an expert. Candidly, funny speaking, this group, I think we all own property management companies and probably all have licenses. I'm almost licensed. I don't love realtors, but I've learned how much value they can add for new investors by just forcing you to get started. I think a lot of investors spin their wheels for a long time, building models, studying comps, doing all sorts of stuff that ultimately, if you just got started, you would have to learn. And your realtor might already know and be able to tell you. So find a really, really strong, seasoned multifamily broker when you go find your first building who knows that's it.
Investment-minded broker. I love it.
Investment-minded broker. And that VA loan, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, we never came back to it, but man, that is so powerful. I had a client this year, Alan Tang, so shout out to him. He got money back at the closing. Because we had credits. He bought a property in Jeff Park and got paid. I was that it doesn't make any sense. And the rate was lower than the usual, someone putting 20% down. It's just unreal.
It's crazy. I mean, when you include tax rebate, the repayment, as well as any comps you get, you often will make money at the closing table, especially right now is the best time ever to use a VA loan. Why? Sellers do not have the power they've had over the past 10 years. They do my first VA deal, 55 tours in Wicker Park and Logan Square. 6 offers, 5 declines. The 6th one declined us. And then when they found out they needed a roof, we were the only ones dumb enough to say, sure, we'll buy your building if you just put a new roof on. If we didn't have the STR plan, I don't know if we would have made a lot of money in that building, but it is so powerful, but you have to really pay attention, I think, because it is 100% leverage loan. And I haven't met anybody yet who's failed investing in multifamily with VA, but I'm sure at some point I will meet somebody who didn't ever live there, didn't pay enough attention, and the leverage caught up to them. It is to be used cautiously.
All right. Awesome. Yep. Before going further, thank you very much for your service. Appreciate that. I don't want that to slip by. But what do you do for fun?
Golf.
Okay.
and play with the 2-year-old.
What's the handicap?
I don't keep one anymore since the baby was born. I was down under a 10, 7, 8 when I was living back in Minneapolis.
Ooh, you're legit.
Yeah. It's like when I was little, I knew I wasn't a good athlete. I'm still fat. I knew that golf was going to be one of those things I could play forever and beat my friends at someday. So, yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Give us a good book, podcast, or self-development activity you'd recommend for our listeners.
Book. Always book. How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. My go-to, read it every couple of years. Just helps me level set and reevaluate.
All right, cool. I was writing that out. Besides yourself, name one person in the local network that you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
Dude, all day. Andrew D'Orazio, my spirit animal. He's the one who actually runs all the day-to-day in our property management company and our syndication, and has been crushing it the last couple of years. And he's just a super passionate VA investor, broker, and he's also just a stud GP. I think, especially for how new we are as GPs, only doing this for 6-7 years, and we've already had some really nice investor returns and some decent cash flow in the meantime until we can exit those deals. But like, just a great human, West Point guy. That's his only fault. So
I was gonna say, Navy guy giving West Point credit. He must be a good dude.
He's a great guy. Yeah.
So, JD, thank you so much. You provided a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? And is there any way they can provide value to you?
Yeah. Deals in Westtown, 6 to 20 units, $5 to $20 million. Love it. Only Westtown for the most part too. And I'd be happy to add value to them too if I can. I mean, reach out. We do a real estate meetup. We're restarting a real estate meetup, I should say. We used to do it when I used to live here monthly. It's kind of veteran focused, but honestly, we never really restrict it. And we have accountants in, self-directed IRA experts, short-term rental experts. We cover a wide range of topics based on request. And, hit me up on LinkedIn if you ever want to come meet up. We usually do it in the Merchandise Mart, and we just go hang out, have some beers, we buy pizza, and everybody just networks, gets to know people. We usually greet some contractors, stuff like that. It's a good time.
We got to get you on straightupchicagoinvestor.com on the meetup page so we could promote it too.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, I'd really appreciate that. We used to have like 20, 25 people showing up, and we just relaunched it. So we're probably going to get 15, 20 for the first one. So I'd appreciate some help.
Cool.
Well, let's get you to 50 here.
Yeah. Well, that would be over capacity. Awesome.
So, all right, Mark, we got a Chicago fact to play for. Who are we playing for? Who's our sponsor?
All right, today our sponsor is Perry Farrell from First Community Mortgage. We are playing with Jake Gathersburg, bought a t-shirt. So Jake, if myself or JD gets this question right, which I'll say it's 50-50, you will get a $50 gift card brought to you by Perry Farrell and First Community Mortgage.
All right. So we know our guest today is a Navy vet. So I took a question from the Great Lakes Naval Station located in North Chicago. And this is a tough one. So all these facts or all these statements are true, except, so I'm going to name four statements. You got to find the one that is false about the Great Lakes Naval Station. So A, it's the Navy's largest training facility.
True.
B, it's home of the Navy's only boot camp. C, it's made up of over 2,000 different buildings. Or D, it's created enough jobs to increase Illinois' GDP by $4.6 billion. All these are insanely impressive. I just wanted to show off the thing. I made this question too hard, but
A and B.
One of those statements is false.
A and B are
only true. One. The other three are true.
A and B are for sure true. 2,000 buildings sounds high. I've been on Great Lakes. They have a great PX.
I'll take the GDP one, and you JD, you take the 2,000 billion.
Right, yeah.
That way, you're confident one and two.
Specific. I'll take.
You nailed it. There's only 1,100 buildings. Only
1,100.
Yeah, all right. Good strategy, JG.
That means Jake gets a $50 gift card. So congratulations, Jake. We'll get that out to you. Brought to you by Perry and First Community. So it was good. That was pretty good teamwork right there too. So JD, thanks for coming on. I actually have a whole bunch more questions that we'll have to get you back on here and go deeper. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, you got to check out Build Your Team. StraightUpChicagoInvestor.com. Right on the homepage, smack dab in the middle, Build Your Team. We have a whole bunch of resources for whatever it might be, your first flip, your first rehab, your first purchase, looking for a broker, whatever it might be. We got people you can at least trust and depend on that we've worked with over the years to help. It's all about the team you have around you. So that's why we put this together. So Tom, or JD, thank you. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, we will see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tom.